Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fielka. Today is July 16, 2023. We want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast, I'm Probably Wrong About Everything. We also want to thank Dane Benko for introducing me to Linus Ignatius. Thanks for being here, Linus. Where are you calling in from?
My pleasure. I'm right now in the sleepy town of Stonington, Connecticut.
Very cool. First question is, what is the best thing for a human being?
Connection to purpose, I think. I think some people find it through community. Some people find it through obsession with their craft. Some people find it in taking pleasure in every moment of life. But yeah.
Very good. What's your favorite form of information? How it comes into you?
Oh my God, I love animation. I love animation. I feel like it's like reality, but more fun.
I agree. It's an amazing art form. So, why do you think humans collect or gather information?
I think there's the illusion that having more information gives us more control. And there are times when that's true, right? Like you want to prepare for a test, you learn everything you can.
Yeah.
But there are times when that's not true, but it still feels safer to do so. I mean, I think that's the compulsive part. I think there's probably a more innocent part, which is just that we're curious.
Yeah.
You know?
No, I like what you said, because that's really what it's all about with these interviews is how can we expand the vision of other points of view and not just stay comfortable in our own, That was well put. Do you think this need or want to collect information is more innate or more invented?
Well, they say that like if you took a human from hundreds of years ago and you took that same organism and it was born today, there hadn't been such major changes in evolution that human wouldn't still be able to learn calculus and, learn how to use a computer, right? That we're sort of similar. It's just that we're building on like collective knowledge. And when you're born into a world with more collective knowledge, you have access and then you can, go that much further. So, but, I mean, it makes me think about the development of like opposable thumbs and then being able to use tools. And they say, or some theorize that using language was kind of an extension of being able to use tools. That when you start to use more complex tools that have maybe two or more parts and that serve a function that's one or two pieces removed, that tool is almost working like a word is. So, it makes me wonder about that. But I also wonder about like, okay, a bee is able to communicate through movement where it found the next hive or the pollen source. So there's clearly something like kind of instinctually evolutionarily advantageous for a communal society to have really advanced communication. So so I'm not a biologist. I don't really know on a scientific level, but I guess maybe there's some combination of both things.
Yeah. And that's good. You said that really well put, Linus. And some of my question might be like, oh, that's a neuroscientific question, but it's mainly what I'm asking for is your hunch or your guess. And that was really, really well put. Do thoughts create emotions?
Yeah, I didn't used to believe that, actually. I sort of thought emotions were just these things and you have to feel them. And if you try to think your way out of them, you're not letting yourself experience them. But I have, a therapist who I have worked with for years, who I love. And she presented a model for emotion, which posits that behind every emotion is a thought or an attitude or perspective. And part of why that didn't seem intuitive to me is that often I'm having thoughts without having articulated the thoughts. I don't necessarily have like a spoken monologue going at all times. I often have kind of impressionistic thoughts, sort of that blur the line between thought and feeling.
Yeah.
But in order to figure out what the thought is behind the emotion, I have to, for example, write it all down or meditate or create a lot of space for the words to drop in. And, so I've started to believe her model, which is that, our thoughts create emotions, and therefore, yes, an emotion is there to be felt, not to be controlled, but an attitude can be controlled, which can give rise to different emotions, which then gives rise to a different reality.
Really well put. And you got ESP because you anticipated the next question. Fill in the blank. I don't know what I think until I
say it to myself.
Yeah.
I had a teacher once who said that writing is a form of thinking.
Yeah.
We don't know what we think until we enact the process of writing as thinking. And I think, meditation or pondering, deep pensive states have to do with like creating an active self expressing of what's going on inside the mind.
Well, Linus, McLuhan says, I don't know what I think until I say it. Joan Didion says, I don't know what I think until I write it. But I like you saying, I don't know what I think and I say it to myself. That's even taking it one step further. So can humans think without language?
That is such a good question. I think there's a Borges story about a man who's not able to forget.
Yeah.
And because he's not able to forget, he's not able to think.
Yeah.
His mind is in constant state of flood. It's a question, right? Like, can a baby think? Well, how do you define thinking? Is thinking, having an impulse for something and the brain being able to make the body pursue that thing? Maybe, because my dog thinks, my dog dreams. She was having nightmares last night. She was going, woof, 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 in her sleep last night. It's imagistic, whatever's happening, but I guess it's thought in some way. Yeah. And then also like language is not just verbal. Dogs, I had a trainer recently who showed me how dogs speak with their bodies, and trying to get dogs to obey verbal commands is actually an active translation. And she got my dog to learn how to sit in about 20 seconds as a puppy by using hand gestures. And then she said, you use the hand gestures and then you start to repeat the words while you do the hand gestures, and the dog will start to speak your language, which is like, you need to listen, because she's so aware of my body in relation to her in space as a form of communication.
Yeah. You're really good, Linus, because this series is about inventing new questions and new metaphors. And Chomsky says the language is not just words. It's a culture, a tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is. What do you do when language doesn't work? When language breaks down, what do you do?
Like, can you give me an example? Or,
well, it could be anywhere. You're a friend or a family member, you say something and they don't quite get what you're saying, or there's a communication breakdown. What do you usually do?
Yeah. Well, it's this like fundamental terror of realizing that the gap is much wider than I thought I was able to close,
Yeah.
And can I sit with that terror and just like validate the fact that I am having an experience as something that somebody else might not ever understand.
Yeah.
And it's like I'm very I'm not an absolutist, there's like a profound loneliness to being, and there's a profound connection to being.
Yeah.
And I think I've lived a lot of my life feeling like I need to get people to see. And so, for example, if somebody misspeaks, it used to be very important to me to rewind the tape and make sure they were aware that they said something wrong not
Yeah.
because I wanted them to feel bad, but because it
Yeah.
was so urgent for me that we had a shared reality.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I guess there's like a certain self coaxing, self comforting that lets me be less stressed about that desire.
Yeah. Wow, Lonnie, she brought up a lot, and McLuhan has a great line: "The gap is where the action is." That the terror in that gap, that resonating interval. But you really made me reflect on something. You know, my wife and I, 25 years together, like 24 years ago, I said something. She says, "Stop yelling at me." And I turned to her mom, who was sitting there. I says, "Did I just yell at her?" And her mom said, "No." And we eventually talked this out, and she goes, "It felt like you were yelling at me." That leads to this question: are we humans more feeling beings or more thinking beings?
Well, I just saw a TikTok that said that as long as we're existing, we are in an emotional state, we are in a thought state, and we are in a behavioral state.
Yeah.
There's never a moment in our lives when we are not in all three of those.
Yeah.
And I don't know, this was a psychiatrist, but I don't know if that's accepting certain neurodivergent people. I don't know, maybe if you have certain mental impairments, you're not in a thought state, but you're certainly always in a behavioral state. Even if you're doing nothing, that's a behavioral state.
Yep.
So if you're all of those things at all points, then it's hard to say you're one more than the other at any time.
Yep. No, it's totally true. I always say, you adding that behavior word is really heavy for my studies. I never, but here's the thing. I say it's a stupid question because we're both feeling and thinking, and we can't really separate them, but we think we can because we invented the words thinking and feeling. And 80% of people go, "Oh, this is how they answer that question. I think we're more feeling beings." They literally say, "I think we're more feeling." So you really opened it up. Here's two questions from Alan Turing, 1950s. Is thinking a function of the soul?
No, I don't think so. So I was really influenced by the book I'm a Strange Loop, Douglas Hofstadter book. He wrote Gödel, Escher, and Bach, which I didn't read, but I did read this. And his whole thesis is kind of built around the idea that, so when you take a camera and you point it at its own screen, which I used to do as a kid, with like a VHS camera, and you hook it up to your TV and you point it at its own screen, what are you going to see? And you end up seeing a kind of fractal. You end up seeing sort of like, it looks like a wormhole. And if you tilt the camera, the wormhole starts to spiral like a kaleidoscope. And he said that consciousness is an illusion born out of self-referentiality. So just like there's no wormhole, it's just an image repeated, and it creates a beautiful pattern. That's what consciousness is. And so the more elaborate the physical tools for self-appropriation, the more conscious something will become. So if our brains are able to create these things called words that can then create tools and concepts in order to express self, it starts with being able to see and perceive and feel yourself, which dogs have, babies learn at some point, right? The mirror stage. But then, as you gain language and you gain kind of awareness of self, then this consciousness kind of deepens and complicates and creates more and more patterns. And but I think, what was the question? Is thinking a product of the soul? Was that the question?
Is thinking a function of the
function
soul?
Of the soul.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think, a soul is a pattern, but I think, things that don't have at least conscious thought still have that beautiful spirit of life. Trees have a spirit of life. Maybe they're thinking in a way. Again, is thinking just being able to communicate a need and pursue that need? If so, then maybe it is. I don't know. Now I'm questioning. There's this artist who I wish I had her name, but she creates these AI kind of they're almost like giant helium balloons with tentacles, and they move through the space, and some of them are shy and some of them are curious, and they react to heat maps of the people walking through the space. And she says that being in the space is like swimming with whales. That these things are not alive in the traditional sense, but yet it's impossible not to feel they have souls.
Yeah.
But maybe AI is a form of thinking. I don't know. I guess I waffled on the question depending on how we define thinking.
Yeah.
So if thinking is just conscious, rational thought, then I don't think so. But if thinking is a broader definition, then maybe.
Dude, that's what this is all about, is waffling. Let's waffle on, man. It's really beautiful how you open up. You had a certainty with that no, and then you open it up and ask like 5 new questions, anticipating like the next 3 questions perfectly. The next turn question is, wait, I got to ask you, do you think you have ESP? Just an aside, do you ever sense that you have?
Well, as a kid, I wanted to be a magician. That was my dream, and then I sort of, the more I realized that magic was trickery, the less interested I was in it. And then I became a filmmaker because I think it's like sort of a different type of magic. So I was obsessed with the idea of ESP as a kid, and I would do tests with like
really
stuff like that. And I never really did so well. But I also, there's sometimes like when people kind of resonate, there's sort of something that seems like ESP, which is more just like an intuitive understanding.
Intuitive understanding is another one. I just always say, you got ESP, you anticipate the next question, because I love. But here's the second turn question. Can machines think?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
I do think so. Because, there's a big hullabaloo about AI being plagiarism software.
Yeah.
Which I don't think that's wrong.
Yeah.
But I also think that that's what we all do, and AI is just better at it.
Hello, get over it. These people are freaking out. Yeah, they're just better at it.
Well, and I will say, there's a serious question, which is livelihood, and what does it mean to put people out of a job? I mean, that's a different question, and I think that's a worthwhile question. But yeah, I think
they've been putting every technology has been putting people out of jobs forever, and you just invent new jobs, blah blah blah. Anyways, I don't want to get too, I don't want to express my biases, but that was beautiful. Do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
Well, I think there's a difference between happiness and contentment, and happiness has to do with like, or at least the way I see it, happiness has to do with like, if I get this thing, then I'll have secured happiness. And contentment for me is more based on like, how can I get more present in the moment and more at home in the moment that I'm in?
Yeah.
And so, I can experience contentment while experiencing very painful emotions. Yeah. But I don't know that I can experience happiness while I'm experiencing very painful emotions. Yeah. So I think the pursuit of happiness is kind of bullshit, actually. Yeah. For me, I mean, for maybe some people it resonates, but like it doesn't serve me as a concept. No. But contentment very much does.
Yeah, it's really good. Again, it's me and you versus the wording on the questions. So you sussed out that word for me. You didn't go, well, it depends on what you mean by happiness. You just went into this contentment thing, which again taught me a lot. But it's interesting because Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, he says happiness doesn't necessarily last. Meaning tends to last. Mm-hmm. So here's the question you really anticipate. Does the brain more detect consciousness or create it? Like, is consciousness there bubbling away and we're more so detecting it or more so creating
it? I think it has to be both, just like a camera pointed at its own screen, right? Yeah. The camera is is creating the image and then detecting the image it's just created, and that's what creates the loop. I'm going to turn on a light because I feel like I'm slowly dimming before your eyes.
In fact, what you said about that, I want you to continue, but I just wanted to go back to that strange loop thing, because I mean, I just pulled a Hofstadter article from the New York Times like an hour ago for this big seminar we're having. And when you said, you point the camera into the screen and you get a fractal, that's called video feedback. And McLuhan has a great thing where he talked about, well, what about feedback and feed forward? So it's almost like that's what Hofstadter seems to be teaching us, that consciousness is an illusion, but we have to deal with it or make art out of it or embrace its contradictions, whether we're creating or detecting it. So back to your answer, are we more so detecting consciousness or more so creating it?
Yeah. Well, I will say about Hofstadter, one of the beautiful things about that book that makes it a far more personal read is that his wife had died. I don't know how many years, but some years back by the time he had published that book. And all of his theories about consciousness were now in the context of what does it mean to lose somebody?
Yeah.
And so what he was kind of building towards, and he's very anxious in the book about trying to like defend against a reader assuming that he's just doing this to deal with his grief. But I think it makes it more beautiful, which is what he's building towards is that when you meet somebody and you get to know them, a strange loop is created in your mind for that person as well.
Yeah.
So when the person is lost, all you've lost is the most complex, most developed version of that loop that's had the most time to mature and had the most input to complicate. But when you've known somebody for so long, that loop of them that you have in your brain, that self-conscious reference and framework is as much a piece of their consciousness as the one that lived in their mind.
Yeah.
And I think that's a pretty amazing, it's a little bit like some of the existentialists who say, yes, this is meaningless, and that means we get to make something out of this. We get to determine what the meaning is.
That's a question I never ask anymore. And it's, why is it so difficult for humans to consider the possibility that life may be pointless? Because everybody would go, because it's not pointless. Pointless. I'm saying, why is it so hard to consider the possibility? And then one guy, I've did these in coffee houses, and he had 40 of his friends there, and he goes, everybody in this room knows it's pointless. And I'm like, I'm not saying life is pointless or saying it could be pointless. I'm saying, why is it hard for us to consider that it might be pointless? So it's, again, hard. I appreciate what you're doing is listening, because it's hard, because, I garble this up with quotes and all this, frivolous stuff that could apply or not apply, but you're getting to the essence. And that's,
there's a book I read, or I reread every so often, called Housekeeping by Marilyn Robinson.
Yeah.
And it's really just so beautiful and very philosophical and simple in a way too. But there's a line in it, I'm not quoting it directly, but it's something like, we take it as given that the person reflected in someone's eye is the image in their eye.
Yeah.
But there are still complications.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really important. My friend said that's the beginning of human identity consciousness, is that we saw the first humans saw their face in the other person's eye. And then it gets so much deeper, because McLuhan reinterpreted the Narcissus tale and called, narcissism is rooted in the word narcosis. So anyways, you can read it. It's narcissism as narcosis. And it's this thing about the human, basically what you brought up with her, Marilyn Robinson, is the gaze, the human gaze. And it's like, the first thing you probably see when you're a baby is your mother's eyes, and she's about to give you food. So you're like, wow, those eyes give me food. I'll take it. And it's all about this unconditional eye, food, wow, what an amazing phenomenon, that the eyes connected to this, pleasure or unconditional love. What's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
Light, absolutely. Because thought has to move. It's a physical motion. It's electricity. But light is the universal constant.
Yeah. Audre Lorde, the poet, said, you can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools. Yvonne Rainer responded and said, you can if you expose the tools. What new tool do you suggest?
For dismantling the master's house?
Again, Linus, you put it in the context you want. If you want to apply the opening quote, that's fine. And if you want to use the word new, it's basically what tool do you gravitate towards, but you can apply it if you want to the quotes.
Well, right now, it's something I struggle with because I consider myself particularly politically active in a way, but I'm an artist and my work is not always politically, overt. I make films that have narratives that tell stories. And I struggle sometimes with like, okay, it's very, noble to say to myself that I'm, that's my form of activism, but does it really do anything? How does it move people? Does it, I had a teacher once who said that like, when it comes to culture, things move as a wave. And so at the crest of the wave are the people who fight for policy change, but all the work that goes into that wave, all of the art that came out and all of the, creative conversations or whatever activist, activations give momentum and pressure to support the crest of the wave. So I'd like to think that right now I'm sort of in pre-production for a short film about a tomboy, this young girl who's sort of androgynous, who's being forced to dress up and perform at her mother's Easter party. And she has this like hyperactive imagination and is sort of in a world filled with terrors, very much in a Pan's Labyrinth type of way. And so this is the first film that I'm making that's heavily leaning on animation, stop motion, puppetry, kind of this Gesamtkunstwerk, this in leaning on so many different modes of art to make this story happen. So for me, those are all new tools. And, I've seen a couple of films in the last couple of years that sort of convinced me that everything I make from now on, I want it to be fun. It can be incredibly, it can have a bite and it can still be fun. It can be challenging and still be fun. I used to make stuff that was a lot more antagonistic towards the audience, but I had a change of heart. So those are, I don't think they're new tools for the world, but they're new tools for me.
It's good. Total theater. What new toy do you suggest?
I use ChatGPT a lot as a writer.
Wow.
And I don't use it to generate a final product. I use it as a thinking tool. So I'll say, here are my characters, what are 10 ways that this scene could end?
Yeah.
And sometimes I think they're all bad ideas but it gives me, and now I know what doesn't work. Sometimes there are one or two that are worth exploring. If you ask it to write the scene, it's pretty clunky and ham-fisted. So again, it's not really like a final product tool for me, but it definitely helps me think. And, for example, like I've been developing this piece that's set in the 1940s, and it's this kind of ensemble murder mystery. And one of the characters is being treated for dementia. And so I can ask ChatGPT, like, what types of medications would somebody have been prescribed
Yeah.
for dementia? And you can ask Google that, but then when it gives me an answer, I can say, okay, great. What are some of the side effects of this one drug? It'll tell me. Then I can say, okay, what are some of the effects of long-term treatment for dementia? How would that make somebody feel? So it's like Google Plus, it's like an advanced form of getting answers to creative questions.
It's really good to hear that. What do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
I'm woefully obsessed with my own success. It's like I wish I could kind of unlock the door to that prison and just step out of it, because it really is not, it doesn't serve me. But that's the biggest thorn in my side, is like, what have I achieved? What have I not achieved? What do I wish had gone my way?
Yeah.
That's what I lie awake at night about. And it's very self-obsessed, but that's the truth.
Dude, one of my heroes, Andy Warhol, said, don't worry about what people think of your art. Just keep making it. Which is such a great, because it's so easy to get discouraged. Oh my God. Especially films and film festivals and all that. Okay. McLuhan learned from Ezra Pound, the poet, that artists are the antenna of the race. They're broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, so we might be able to cope with what we don't like about our inventions. So I asked you, Linus, the question Marshall probed his whole career. Why do we ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though the artists are broadcasting them to us?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think of like Black Mirror, which is a show that I haven't watched the newer seasons as much, but when it first came out, I thought it was really this profound, sick reflection of some of the really distorted technological advances that define our era and the eras to come. I mean, it's sort of the show constantly is presenting near futures that we are in danger of falling into. But Black Mirror never stopped me from, checking Instagram on my phone. It was harrowing to watch these episodes, but it never changed my behavior per se. Probably because, you could argue that Black Mirror was in its own right a narcotic produced for the media mechanism. I mean, I make films. Films exist on screens. Any film that's about screen addiction and the pitfalls is sort of like, serving people McDonald's burgers that have wrappers that say, watch what you eat. I mean, it's sort of like doomed to fail, maybe. So it's probably just how, dopamine has this very strong pull.
Yeah, dopamine strong. Dude, you should see a film called Not Film. Okay, it's a feature doc on the only film that Samuel Beckett made.
Okay.
And the first thing, I mean, it's brilliant opening, but it's a doc on a film. And Buster Keaton's in film. The name of Beckett's film is called Film, and this is a doc about it. And it starts off with this line I love. He goes, Ross Lippman, the filmmaker, goes, I hate films that are about filmmaking. And that's what his film is about a film and filmmaking. But anyways, it reminded me of that. So do artists have moral obligation?
Well, everybody has a moral obligation.
Yeah.
I think. I mean, obligation is sort of an interesting word, like responsibility. Obligation sounds so begrudging, like, oh, I'll do this because I have to. Responsibility is like, I mean, when we walk down the street, we're all responsible for not punching each other in the face, I guess. And we can disavow that responsibility, and it will either, if enough of us disavow it, it will make it really hard for anything to get done in society. If just one or two of us disavow it, then we get punished. So, I mean, I think like, I think about, in the past, I've been really critical of artists with a really major platform who avoided speaking up politically.
Yeah.
Because I really thought, okay, the bigger your platform, the higher your responsibility, especially if you actually do care about these issues.
Yeah.
You know, I've since maybe lessened my expectations of
Yeah.
people, because at the end of the day, like, no one person is powerful enough to,
Yeah.
I don't know, take on that burden. But so I guess in my own life, I'm sort of two minds about that question.
It's good. It's good to get that big view. And are you, well, what's the difference between rights and responsibilities?
Rights and responsibilities. Rights, RIGHT.
Yeah. Like the right to
So,
free speech, you know.
yeah, I mean, as a member of the LGBT community, you know, the right to gay marriage is, you know, I see it as sort of like a thing we get to enjoy. A responsibility is often, you know, something that you have to do it, not because of all the, you know, warm and fuzzy feelings it gives you, but because of a sense of duty, or a sense of,
Yeah.
you know, the greater good. If I get married, it's not for the greater good. It's so I can have a life I enjoy. A sense of responsibility would be, I think, for my community to have its life,
Yeah.
you know, a better life. And so I guess it's like, responsibility to me has a more sort of communal oriented view, and a right is like something I get to appreciate myself, maybe.
Yeah.
I never thought about it, but that feels like it's on the way to the answer.
Yeah. Are you more afraid of new ideas or more afraid of old ideas?
I think I'm pretty excited about new ideas. I can totally see how that would change, like with, you know, how it could change with age. You know, like, I remember when TikTok first came out, I thought TikTok dances were just the stupidest thing I'd ever seen, because it's dance moves, but your arms can't leave this radius, because you'll
Right.
go off. So all the moves are like this, and like this, and slaps, and it's just, to me, it's like there's nothing like that doesn't look like how your body wants to move, and it just, and I kind of still love to hate on it, just because I think it's funny to, you know, be Larry David about it and complain. But I could see something like that becoming a more serious, like, wariness of future generations, especially if they're like, you know, I see it in the LGBT community, like, so, you know, non-binary identities, some of the older trans people that I'm friends with are very wary of the introduction of kind of more non-binary identities being in the discourse, because there's this attitude of, we fought for the right to be considered, you know, a woman or a man, and now you're doing that. And so I see how sometimes that's just a product of age, and I hope that I remain open-minded, and I'm quite afraid of a lot of old ideas. I mean, it depends how old, right? Because there are certain, like, if you go far enough back, you get some pretty exciting ideas sometimes.
Yeah. Can you conjure up your earliest memory ever, or one of them?
Yeah, I always ask myself this question. The one that comes to mind usually, well, one of my, pretty much my earliest memory I had, it was a dream. And I was, you know, probably like 4, so maybe 4-ish, 3 or 4. And I climbed into my parents' bed, and I closed my eyes, and I dreamt of this, like, spinning ballerina with sparkles all around her.
Wow.
Around that time, I also remember waking up in the middle of the night, sneaking into the bathroom. I don't know why I felt like I was sneaking, but I distinctly remember sneaking into the bathroom. There was sort of, like, you know, a tray of you know, hygiene things, including a razor. And I remember taking my dad's razor and touching the blade and seeing a little drop of blood on my finger. It didn't hurt or anything, but I just saw a little bit of blood. And I remember thinking, I just did something really bad. Nobody can ever know this.
Oh my God, that's heavy.
Isn't that funny?
Is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
You know, Marilyn, in Housekeeping, Marilyn Robinson says, she's talking about memory and how the mind turns to a gesture or a corner of a room or the way somebody touched your hair so many years ago, even if you're not trying to go that way. And she says, what are all these fragments for, if not to be knit up finally?
Knit, K-N-I-T?
Yeah.
Knit up. That's good.
Yeah. Memory is really painful, but, you know, I guess it's better than forgetting.
Yeah.
So there's this whole thing in the book about, you know, memory and longing is just a shade away from having. That you don't taste a cherry,
right?
You don't, or a strawberry. I think it's the strawberry she always comes, but you don't taste a strawberry with all of its vividness if you have it. The not having of it makes it unfold into this like splendid, replete dimension.
The not having. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It almost reminds me of McLuhan says, we don't taste the food in the restaurant. We taste the description and the menu.
Yeah.
You know, and so, I mean, it's not, anyways. Linus, this is really fun. I really appreciate it. Tell me someone within your immediate family, then outside your immediate family, just briefly, who had an impact on you, kind of like a role model, and what specifically was that impact?
Inside immediate family and then outside.
Yep.
Hold on one sec, because
Sure.
my mom's right here. Hold on a sec. Okay, so inside immediate family. Well, I mean, you know, it's kind of crazy, but my niece, who is 9 now, has had profound impact on me, and it was as an adult. You know, she was born when I was 22, I guess, and she taught me how to play again. I mean, I remember when I used to play with her, when she was 3 or so, 2 or 3, like I felt like this awkward kind of large man, sort of trying my best to play princess and prince with her, and it was really uncomfortable, and I learned how to play again with her.
That is amazing.
So I would say that's the one that comes to mind.
That is really great to go to revert. You know, everybody says their parents or their grandfather or their aunt, or you know, they always speak of people in the past, but to get in touch with the word play is always important to me, and that you were open to that. So now outside your immediate family.
Yeah. You know, I did a semester on a farm when I was in high school, in Vermont, and the program, it was a very small kind of tight-knit group, and the director of the program, Alden Smith, he is this very beautiful, well-spoken, passionate, kind of quiet caretaker type. And I signed up to do animal tracking with him. And he took me and this one other student, he took us to his secret orchard. And he had, on one of his nature hikes, he had discovered an old abandoned apple orchard that was being choked. So it was on the verge of dying. It was overgrown, you know, shaded out, and being choked. And he contacted the owner of the land, who was some East Coast, you know, person who was not at all connected to the land, and he asked for permission, and he was granted permission to steward this land. And so he basically spent a couple years clearing out the brush and reviving the apple trees and turning this sort of magical spot into a haven for wildlife. So, you know, by the time he showed it to us, it was this kind of huge, I mean, maybe like half, maybe like a basketball court sized field. And it's, you know, huge kind of trees creating a canopy over it, but in the shade, these squat little crabapple trees, and all the brush he had cleared was on the edge, and bears had made dens in the brush. And the trees were covered with scratches, and he had wildlife cameras taking pictures, you know, motion sensor pictures, and there were deer and beavers and raccoons and moose and all sorts of animals. And he had created this haven for wildlife for no reason other than that it was a way to give back.
God, what an amazing.
He unearthed a spring, and he created a river, and he lined it with stones too. And we had our, one time I think we had our English final there, and he showed us the bear paw next to the spring in the mud, because the bear had been drinking from the spring water that he had, you know, unearthed. It's pretty amazing.
That was an amazing story. You really articulate, because I really I was able to, like, you're a filmmaker. You described it in a sense that I saw that movie in my head. Like, I pictured that. Really beautiful. So did your parents raise you a particular religion?
We were kind of like, go to church and dress up nice on Christmas and Easter and talk to the pastor, and you've earned your religious credit for the year. Yeah. And there was often talk of like, oh, you know, I believe in spirituality more than I believe in the scripture. But I went to a school, I grew up in Hong Kong, and I went to a school that was pretty Christian, actually. And I remember I had, you know, I was like one of the little punks who was arguing with the sort of well-behaved Christian kids. We had chapel and stuff like that. And I was like, I think everything's meaningless, like as an 8-year-old. And people were like, oh, you don't believe in God? I feel so sorry for you. I remember that's something that somebody said to me.
Do you pray?
So I'm a member of 12-Step, and one of the kind of tenets of 12-Step is prayer and meditation. I'm not a theistic person, so my spirituality comes more from like a sense of higher self, a sense of connectedness, a sense of a bigger picture that I don't even deign to be as powerful enough to understand or see. So I've had to kind of co-opt that word prayer and turn it into something else, which is like, you know, orienting my mind around intentions, sending out positive messages and trusting that will change my energy, you know, communicating with my higher self, meditating on a concept. So in a way I do, but I don't think I've had to judo the term to mean something a little bit different.
Wow. Judo the term. I love that. Jiu-jitsu and judo are so important for me. Jiu-jitsu. Oh, yeah? Yeah, because it's like push and pull. It's sort of like processing both ends. And jiu-jitsu is an amazing word. It means art and science gently. It's an amazing etymological root. Check it out. But
jitsu, so I've been learning Japanese, actually. So jitsu would be the art of, right? What's the Jew part?
I think it's combined, the art of art and science gently. Look it up. It's I keep going back to it. You go to etymology online, and it's the combination of words it's rooted in is amazing, you know. And then it's up to interpretation, because etymology is funny. It's, you know, some words go of unknown origin. Well, every word is of unknown origin. People just made it up. But we think, you know, well, it has to be rooted in some logic here, you know. But if God exists, what would you like God to say to you after you die?
Welcome.
Yeah. Do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
I have a pretty psychologically minded approach to the world. Um, so whenever I'm like presented with kind of evil people, I'm usually thinking about like either what's the trauma, what's the villain's origin story,
Yeah.
or if there's no origin story and it's just that somebody was born with sociopathic tendencies, like
Yeah.
okay, how can we explain that with the brain?
Yeah.
I don't think that's mutually exclusive with a take on the world that talks about evil, just in the same way that I can talk about a soul, even though I believe in neuroscience, and I believe the soul is just this pattern of energy.
Yeah.
So, you know, but I guess I shy away from wanting to classify people as evil because it doesn't leave room for redemption.
Yeah.
And maybe this is just something that I find more comforting, but I'd like to think that people have room for redemption.
Good. Really beautiful. And so, really, the hidden question, Linus, is how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? Now, set it up. Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from the mob and the samurai. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK said, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And Fellini says, I need an enemy. So it's a lot of thoughts. The basic question is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you respond to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
Well, I mean, I see the allure in that. It's like the classic, if you just ignore your bully, they'll leave you alone. Um, I think many of us who were bullied as kids learned that that wasn't true.
Right.
Like but I think probably, like I have certain people in my life who have been very aggressive towards me, and violent towards me in the past. And so I've been actually talking about this sort of thing a lot recently in therapy and whatever. And, I think like the way out for me has been to really truly get to a place where I don't believe this person can hurt me. And so I think when people say ignore your enemy or don't acknowledge your enemy, probably what's really meant by that is get to a place where they can't hurt you. And so, you know, sometimes that if they're physically abusive, sometimes that means get the hell away from them. But if they're
Yeah.
not, if they're just, emotionally abusive or say things that are hurtful, or if they're aggressive, like, getting to a place where like, it doesn't matter how other people choose to behave towards me. That I have enough of an anchor that I can hold on to my tailbone enough, as a teacher once said, that like that can't actually do anything to me. And
Yeah.
that partially also means like putting to rest the part of me that's like a scared, helpless kid again.
Yeah.
Because I'll if I'm confronted with an angry person, or like somebody who, or even sometimes somebody who disagrees with me politically or is arguing against, like, a lot of my friends are trans. So if I get into like a debate with somebody about whether transgender is, whatever, if people criticize that as a concept, like I get really, I get an edge in my voice. My voice starts to waver. I start to feel helpless and overwhelmed. And, and that's like me going back to being a kid where I don't have any tools. And so it's also, for me, it's been partially like, how do I kind of put that to rest, or like somehow take that kid and like, don't act from that place, but be like, I have you, I can protect you. And then whatever the I is that's speaking to that part of me, that's the part that's like, a therapist I met with once said, it's like, I've constructed this adult, strong man. Like I've built a man who can protect that part of me. So, I mean, it helps that I'm also like, work out and stuff. So I also am like, okay, physically, for somebody to be able to hurt me, like the people who I'm scared of, if they're not like physically stronger than me, it's a really clear indicator that my fear is irrational.
Yeah. Yeah, I like this. I can protect you. The other words I loved was enough of an anchor. That I have enough of an anchor. You even have it. Some people don't even have an anchor, but you have enough of an anchor. Really good wordsmithery. And so this is a follow-up in that same regard. And you actually again used a word. Nassim Taleb said games were created to give non-heroes the illusion of winning. In real life, we don't know who wins or loses, but we can tell who a hero is. Then someone said, well, villains don't think they're bad. They want control. Heroes want freedom. And Gregory Bateson said, hey, if the criminal gets caught, does he go, whoa, my criminal skills weren't up to snuff that day? Or does he go, I did something morally or socially wrong? So it's a lot of prompts, but does punishment work?
Well, I'm an actor as well as a filmmaker, and I play a lot of villains. I'm often cast as a villain. I play a lot of Nazis, a lot of abusive kind of. I played remember the Cambridge Analytica stuff where they sold out information about Hillary, or I don't even remember the details, but I played like the head of Cambridge Analytica in a political thriller once.
Yeah.
The fictionalized version, not the actual guy, but so, and I think I think actually I'm a big fan of The Sound of the Fury.
Yeah.
And Jason, who's this very hateful character, you're in his inner monologue and he feels like such a victim. You can see how much he feels like a victim. And I think that's an earnest belief for a lot of people who do hateful things.
Yeah.
Is they really truly feel like they're the victim. Does punishment work? Probably not for that person. There are like more rehabilitative approaches to prison in Scandinavian countries that seem to be more effective in terms of actually reforming a person. Some would argue that punishment is not there to reform the person. It's there to serve as a warning and a deterrent for others, for the general public. I don't know enough about how those things work. I would be very curious to see the numbers in terms of how effective that is. Versus like a more rehabilitative approach to prison. But I think, the prison justice system is fundamentally so profoundly broken. It's for profit. It enables slavery, and we incarcerate so many people, and disproportionately so many people of color. It's just bizarre. The way it's functions, and it's not addressing the systemic drivers of crime. Which is so unfortunate.
Yeah, it's the prison industrial complex exists. But you said a lot there. I appreciate that. And Sound of the Fury, that's Faulkner, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's you anticipate the next question. James Joyce was the first projectionist in Dublin 100 years ago. Basically,
Volta Films.
Huh? You got it. Volta Films. He basically checked out. He says, this is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree? In fact, Faulkner says years later, sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism. Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you know this, but the reason Dane introduced us is because I'm a huge Joyce fan, scholar, reader, or whatever you want to call it. So yeah, I know a lot about him. I played him once actually in a play.
Beautiful.
And I want to add to the Volta Films piece that he may have said that about the tree, but my understanding is he also financially tanked the project. And so that would be a very convenient cover for
right. You mean he
tanked with his tail between his legs?
Joyce tanked the success of the movie theater. Why are you saying the reason why? Or
I think it was a financial flop, and I don't know if Joyce was responsible for that or if it was more of a money management thing. I have no idea. But
Yeah.
in Elliman's biography, it alludes to that as being a financial failure for him. So
Yeah.
who knows? Maybe his highfalutin point about a tree might have been a cover for a sense of
Well,
failure.
You nailed it, because most people aren't even knowledgeable of those sort of details. And when I say that, they believe what I'm saying. And somebody said, actually, one of the greatest scholars of experimental film said, Joyce didn't say that. Then I says, well, he allegedly said it, because I don't even know the source I have where he said, in any ways, it's bullshit, because Joyce is using literature. Well, you don't. If you describe a tree with literature, that's not a tree. So why don't you just go outside and walk around the town instead of writing Finnegan's Wake, which he did. He just said, hey, the people at the coffee house wrote it. I didn't.
Yeah.
So anyways, it's sort of like, why do we have to? I'm glad we'll get into Joyce a little, but why do we feel we have to recreate things in order to get them?
Yeah. I mean, I think about early cave paintings, which some people, now theorize that with flickering candlelight or torchlight were actually more like stroboscopic films than still images.
Yeah.
But those types of that early type of art, it was sort of in between an aesthetic thing and something that served a purpose. I think sometimes it contain information about mating seasons and where to find these things. I mean, kind of back to a bee being able to dance for how to find pollen. So, there's something about communicating information that is sort of inherent in art, I think. And at the same time, I don't know, I think about, Everything Everywhere All at Once is a movie that I really appreciated last year. And I think what I appreciate about it partially is that it captures a sense of sort of nihilistic, chaotic, millennial kind of grief that I don't know if I've seen reflected before. And it was so moving and comforting to see oh, these people are putting their finger on something that I experience that I didn't know was a shared experience.
Yeah.
So, there must be something there when it comes, but then I think about the modernists, you have Mondrian and you have Klaus Oldenburg making these huge floppy hamburgers and stuff. And it's that's clearly not trying to express information that's essential to a species survival, but it's still kind of telling the history of ideas. So, I guess here's what I will say is most of the life that we live, most of our experiences, we will have forgotten in a year.
Yeah.
So most of the things that happen on a daily basis, we are basically not awake to.
Yeah.
So when you see a piece of art, it's this concentrated drop of something. And, if you watch a movie, you're probably going to remember it more than when you made coffee this morning in a year.
Wow.
So, it's this preordained time period where we turn our senses up in order to pay attention. And I knew somebody who was getting really into meditation who was I can't watch movies, I can't watch TV anymore because it's not good for my meditation practice because I need to be present all the time. I can't spend it all in this one way of and in this escapist way. So, maybe it's because of that. That's sort of what I'm musing towards.
Yeah. You covered a lot there. That's it's really hard to get McLuhan, but he seems to sound like he got everything he knows from Finnegan's Wake, in fact, and the symbolist, but he seems to know what he's saying by cute saying, and gets in Andy Hall and he says the medium is the message, and everybody gets that wrong. He's not saying that the form is the content is more important than the content. He's saying they're both important. I'm a content guy, I'm a literature guy, but I'm going to stress that the form is important because nobody pays attention to the form, And so that's what you brought up was bringing up Modrona and Klaus Ollenberg is Rauschenberg, the painter. They said, "What kind of painter are you?" And he goes, "I'm a landscape painting."
Yep.
And he goes, "Dude, your paintings are ripped up billboards." He goes, "Because that's the landscape."
Yep.
But people, well, no, landscape painting is clouds and trees and rolling hills. Yeah, and they're ripped up billboards looking.
That's actually a quote that I use sometimes when I teach photography, and I share photos I've taken of ripped up billboards. I refer to
Oh, you use that?
Yeah. I love that quote. Is now a good time for a bathroom break, though? I got to go really bad.
Yeah, no, go ahead. I'll keep talking. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah. So, Ignatius, his work as a filmmaker twists together comedy, drama to create layered social commentary. So this is what is on his website. So you can go to his website and explore more his films and his career in photography and acting as well. And after film school in Czech Republic, he directed some events in Berlin, and his short film Mass is shown at film festivals and can be watched on Amazon Prime. And his documentary Positive was shown at festivals in Berlin, London, and had its New York City premiere in partnership with the UN. And one of his projects is Marque and Hector Turned Trash into Treasure, comedy show about a gay elder and his dumb as bucket houseboy and their foibles. So he can be seen on various TV shows and independent films playing Europeans with guns. I like that. That's also on his website.
That's
yeah.
easy.
I love your text. Yeah, when people take a break, I just sort of read from their website. So, yeah, that gave people a little background, and they can read more at your website. And so onward and upward. Talk about this path that you took. You know, you told us earlier that as a kid you wanted to be a magician,
Mm-hmm.
and then you're sort of with tipping points. Then where did you say, I want to be a photographer, I want to study photography, I want to be a filmmaker, I want to study film, and I want to be an actor? Just those three in general. Where were your tipping points, and sort of how that happened for you to establish your callings?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, in high school, I was cast as Ernst Ludwig in Cabaret.
Yeah.
And it was a pretty edgy production of Cabaret for a high school. I mean, it did not go lightly on the Nazism. And I discovered that I have this knack for playing incredibly sadistic villains.
Yeah.
And also the German accent was sort of came really easily to me. And I realized I had this specialty for dialect work. And I think all the validation I received from doing that kind of nudged me towards taking that career seriously. But, you know, I felt like all the messages I got from people were very skeptical towards that career. Like, oh, you know, sure, you'll pursue acting. That's cute, you know. And I really didn't like the idea of like being a waiter and being an actor and kind of, which I did for a couple of years. But I just had this kind of feeling like that didn't feel right. That felt like a misuse of my time and energy. And then when I was in college, I went to Oberlin College and I wanted to study abroad. And I looked at acting programs at first. And then I realized this one program had a film program in the Czech Republic, Czechia now, but Czech Republic at the time. And I just kind of one night wrote up an app for that instead, you know, decided to apply to this film thing. I had also done some 16 millimeter film courses. So that was how I started with kind of film stuff. Although actually, to backtrack, as a, you know, 8-year-old, 7-year-old, I was making films with my brother, and I was we were like making, recreations of the Matrix basically. And I was always playing like the agent, I was always the bad guy who's getting shot. Another European with a gun. So then I did film school, and and then photography just naturally came out of that. I in my acting classes, we did a day of headshots, and I was the one who had camera savvy, so I sort of was the headshot photographer, and the teacher directed the headshots, and I learned a lot just from that. And I realized, like, when I shoot photography, I much prefer to shoot people. I like to shoot.
Yeah.
I like to light people in a way I like to make people look good. I like to flatter people, and capture their spark. That's what's interesting to me, So it just naturally grew out of being a filmmaker and realizing that was another thing I could kind of monetize and get pretty good at. And that
was good summary. And so a screenwriting teacher told me great art or great film is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Stanley Kubrick says the opposite. Great art is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker. What role does intention play in your creative process when you're making a film? Your own film. It's something, your project. Yeah.
Well, I really resonate with what the guy who wrote Little Miss Sunshine. I can't remember his name right now.
Yeah.
But he does these kind of video courses on screenwriting, and his attitude is that all films are philosophical, that every film has a philosophy, and that philosophy kind of dukes itself out and gets kind of stated and expressed in its fullest form in the climax of the film. And so especially for somebody like me, who I'm grappling with what does it mean to be politically active, or to be trying to kind of get a message out there with maybe a message isn't quite the right word, but maybe expose people to ideas that they may have not been open to. Then I'm constantly asking myself, okay, what am I trying to say? And I don't think when people watch my films, they're going to say, oh, that was a video essay on why capitalism is fucked up.
Yeah.
But I do think, they might walk out with this sort of sick, maybe tear it all down pleasure in their gut, and maybe that's enough.
That's good. Sick meaning not bad sick. You mean good sick.
a little bit of, well, there's one.
A little bit of both. Good.
There's one film I'm developing right now that's about like this kind of vampire cult that's a multi-level marketing scheme.
Yeah.
And they harvest blood in order to like make candy to sell on the subway in New York City.
Yeah.
And it's a scathing critique of capitalism, and it will be sick in both senses of the word, I think.
Did you see the Laura Poitras documentary, The Blood and the Beauty?
No, I haven't. That's the Nan Golden one?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I haven't seen it.
No, maybe I should say you've got to see it in regard to your film, but maybe I should say you don't got to see it. Yeah. But anyways, it's but there's also Duchamp saying there's no art without an audience. How much are you thinking of your viewer when you're making your film?
All the time. I think some art forms, you don't have to do that as much. And I think, and even some types of film, you don't have to do that as much. But I mean, film is at the nexus of, capital and creativity. I mean, to get a narrative film made at the scale that I'm hoping to tell these stories, you need upwards of hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
So if I'm not thinking about where this lives, who the audience is, why this will be a success, or in what ways this might be a success, then I'm shooting myself. I'm making it that much more difficult for me to be able to make something to start with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, McLuhan says everything we invent extends some humanness, like knife and fork extends our teeth. Shutter in a camera or projector extends our eyelid. Maybe even non-tangible like religion or philosophy extends consciousness.
Mhm.
What does the moving image camera extend for you? What humanness, whether it's film or video, what human, he says human sensorium, I call it humanness. What what are you extending with the movie camera?
I guess there are a few things. I mean, you know, Quentin Tarantino is one of the reasons I got into filmmaking, Kill Bill, and it was because of the badassery. Like, holy shit, people are so badass, you know. And as an adult, for me, that's not enough to carry a film. That's not enough to carry a career. You know, as a kid, I thought that was enough, but you know, now it's like the validation for the loner. You know, the person who is excluded. Like, I I felt so alone at times in my life. And so, you know, my hope is that like by making films about people who find their way through being outsiders, that it creates a path for others who are in that same position. Or
Yeah,
it doesn't even create a path. It sort of contributes to the shared sense of a path.
yeah,
It's not like I'm doing it for the first time and nobody else has done it, but it's like, you know, how do we imagine a way through? Um,
yeah.
so I think there's like some vindication for the outsider that I'm extending,
Yeah.
and it's self validation. I mean, you know, I talk about, yeah, I think about the audience, but I also, when I think about the audience, I'm not trying to please the masses. I'm trying to make a film that I would think is fucking cool if I
Yeah.
watched it, you know, and I am a demographic, so others like me might think it's cool,
Yeah.
but I can't be shooting from the hip hoping that I can't be people pleasing when I make a film. You know,
Yeah.
I have to think it's fucking cool.
Yeah. Lot there, lot packed in there, dude. That's amazing. Have you studied or got into Paul Schrader's films at all?
Yeah, what he did.
Well, he wrote Taxi Driver, and now
Yeah.
you know he's an interesting character when it comes to the loner kind of sensibility. But you know, you might check into him a little because he didn't come out of John Ford like all his peers did.
Uh huh.
Coppola and Lucas and Spielberg. He's their peer, but he came out of Bresson and Ozu. So he's
Okay.
in the midst of those guys doing this sort of, I mean, Taxi Driver is the pinnacle of his filmmaking in a way, you know.
Yeah, I'm looking at his
Yeah.
filmography. I've only seen Taxi Driver, but I definitely, yeah, that made the
Anyways,
press.
fine. And then one other film that just popped into my head when you were talking about seeing Quentin and your word badassery. That is a great word. Is that a made up Linus word or is that something you've heard a lot? I've never heard badassery.
I think I've heard it. I don't think it. I don't think I've heard it a lot. It's not a common word, but I think I've heard it. I don't think it's a coinage of my own.
I love that word. That's a badass word, badassery. But anyways, the film is, have you seen The Wolf Pack about the kids who are raised in like New York City, like four brothers, and their parents won't let them out of the house. And all their dad does is let them watch movies like Quentin Tarantino. So they start acting out these movies trapped in their house.
Oh my god!
And
I have to watch it.
it's a documentary.
Oh
So
wow!
yeah. Anyways, it showed sort of that impact. And now on to film a little. McLuhan says there's no such thing as a good or bad film. It's a good or bad viewing experience.
Okay.
Any comment on that? And when I say these, I'm not trying to say I think they're right or wrong. They're just prompts to get you to give your own opinion.
Well, I mean, I recently saw The Blackening in theaters, and that was a film where I thought it was kind of poorly made, but I really appreciated the sentiment and the spirit behind the film, so I was able to enjoy it.
Yeah.
You know, like I thought as a, it was a irreverent concept, and I was sort of forgiving about some of its roughness.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a case where like some technical issues that I could poke at about the film somebody asked me to describe it, I'd probably say all of that. You know, I think
Yeah.
it was really imperfect, but I really appreciate what it was trying to do.
Yeah.
So I can see maybe that's my version of that.
Yeah.
You know, I think the problem for me is like when something is rote. I mean, it's like, you know, that's the problem with art that's at the nexus of creativity and capital is like you very quickly, it can degenerate into rote, uninspired, you know, I mean,
Yeah.
there are formulas to making films. There's the shot, reverse shot, there are the over the shoulders, there's the establishing shot. It's like, you know, there's been 100 years of norms and
Yeah.
traditions. And so you can make a film very lazily and
Yeah.
it can be well polished very lazily.
Yeah.
And so, you know, sometimes a well-made film can be incredibly uninspired. And
Yeah.
for me, that's the worst. That's the nightmare for me.
Yeah. And it's amazing art form because it's only 130 years old. In fact, Peter Greenaway said that cinema is much too rich a medium to be left to storytellers. So I don't know how familiar you are with experimental film, but are experimental filmmakers telling stories a different way or doing something completely different? Like, I don't. Do you know the film The Flicker by Tony Conrad? It's basically
No.
black and white frames flickering off and on for 15 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
So it'll put you in an epileptic fit if you have that tendency.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a very important experimental film, but it didn't literally tell a story. It was just a visual experience, but the viewer could have a story go through their head while they're watching it. So it's basically just this idea of Greenaway's cinema is much too rich a medium to be left to storytellers. Any thoughts on that line?
Yeah, I mean, I studied a lot of experimental film in college, like Stan Brakhage and Maya Deren and what's her name, the Belgian, whatever.
Chantal?
Yeah,
Chantal.
yeah, etc. And Kenneth Anger, and whoever did a line describing a cone. I don't remember who that was, but it sounds similar to Flicker. You know, I mean, so I read an article once that I hadn't been able to find in years, and I wish I could because it's such a great concept. But there's this idea, you know, we talk about a willful suspension of disbelief.
Yeah.
And what the writer argued was, no, there's nothing willful about it. You can sit in a dark room with a film playing, a narrative film, and try your damnedest not to enter into the story.
Yeah.
And it doesn't care if you are willing or not. It will take you.
Yeah.
And that's very powerful. And, you know, I think the difference is that like some of these more experimental films, they don't use that tool. They don't use the tool that sweeps you into a story. But like, you know, I mean, I've had very powerful experiences with EMDR, which is, you know, a therapy modality that's almost like watching a film. I mean, I've only done it where you watch somebody's finger while you kind of recount things, but I think there are actually machines that you look at that sort of, there are lights and you watch the lights move and and you experience these profound emotional somatic releases. And, you know, so yeah, I mean, I think there's, you know, what you play across the visual field, there's so much there. I am more of a storyteller, so it's less what I'm prone to, but yeah, I mean, and then you start to get to, okay, this is the history of ideas. So there's storytelling and then there's a history of ideas. So when Stan Brakhage does like moth film and it's, you know, hundreds and hundreds of frames of moths squashed onto you know, onto film stills, like that's more about what is it making you think? It's not about what is, you know, what is the story you're getting pulled into? It's like, what is this idea? What does this tell you about how this person thinks about art? How this, and you know, and some narrative films do that too. I think there's kind of a continuum. I mean, something like Inland Empire, which is another film that was very influential for me, is, you know, a 3-hour experimental film that uses narrative stretches to make you think. I mean, it has a lot of narrative in it, but if you ask somebody what the film is about, any given person might give you a different answer because it's very confusing.
That's
So
Inland Empire's David Lynch.
yeah.
In Linus, go back just for a second. The 4 letters you said were ENBR.
EM like man,
Yeah.
D like dog, and R like roses.
And EMDR is what is it? 3D? I don't know what that is.
So EMDR is, I don't remember what it stands for. Something electromagnetic something release. I think magnetic is wrong, but some acronym. And it's a modality of therapy where it has to do with tracking movement with your eyes. And the way I've heard it explained is that, like, blinking is one of the ways that our brains store information. And so if you recount certain memories or thoughts and you interrupt the blink pattern by tracking something, and you also move your eye through certain spots in your vision field, which are actually, apparently certain spots in your visual field are also kind of attached to certain emotions and certain memories.
Yeah.
Then there's a somatic release that happens that is not possible through talk therapy, which I love talk therapy, but I think these are different angles to approach trauma, or I think it's specifically a trauma release tool. And so I've just done it in the form of following somebody's finger back and forth while I answer questions.
Yeah.
But I think they have actual machines that you can hook up to where I've never seen it, so I don't know. I've heard it described, but I think there's light moving or there's a dot moving or something. But that's not so different from cinema.
No, it taught me a lot. I really appreciate you telling me that, because this is what kids do when they're in school. They rub their eyes and you see these dots. And then Salvador Dali talked about this called the paranoia critical. And it's like, it epitomized it sort of it was epitomized for me on Venice Boardwalk years ago when a deadhead kid said, "Hey, you want to trip without LSD?" And I go, "Sure." He says, "Put these goggles on and blow into this tube, and the shutter will spin, being operated by your breath, and look at the sun, but close your eyes." So you can literally do that by looking at the sun right now with your eyes shut, and do this in front of your eyes, and it will put you into a different trance. But your fingers are consciously moving, and the breath was moving the shutter. Then the dude came back a year later and he had it battery operated, and I put it on. I just went out. It immediately put me into another, whatever those 4 theta, delta, and it sounds like this EMDR operates on something like that. You can literally do it. I tell people, just shut your eyes, look at the sun, and do this, and it will start, doing something similar to what cinema does, because that's what the flicker did, the film I gave as an example. And then, Andrew Knorr, an experimental filmmaker, said, if you put one frame next to another, that is storytelling. That's linear narrative. It doesn't matter if they're abstract. Kubrick did The Pinnacle because he put an experimental film in the middle of 2001, and it helped tell the story. So you could take the Stargate sequence out of 2001 and enter it in an experimental film festival as an abstract animation, and it doesn't need the other stuff. But he did the ultimate and used it as part of the storytelling. Or he was. But I did want to say, Linus, I asked for 90 minutes and it's 90 now, and we only got through 20 of like 40 questions. Can we schedule a part 2? It can be 2-3 months down the line, so we can.
Yeah, that'd be great. Let's do that.
Yeah, but this was really fun, and I wanted to sort of close out this part 1. I appreciate your time. It's really been enlightening for me. with an experimental filmmaker's statement, Hollis Frampton. And he said, narrative is born among the animal necessities of the spirit because we're waiting to die. The question is, can you forget to die?
Well, I think kind of pursuit of dopamine is kind of a temporary forgetfulness of death. And like being addictive, you know, being in pursuit of this external form of happiness is somehow like a denial of death. I think like Eckhart Tolle type approach would be like, die now, die right now. You're always dying. Die now, die fast, die often. You know, CEOs say fail fast, fail often. Die fast, die often. You know, die to the past. That's the only way to enter the present, is to remember death. And you know, what is it like is it Myanmar where they there's this like super high happiness rate, and it's also a culture where they have this like very kind of ingrained reflection on death on a daily basis into their schedule, like even at school and at work. I might be wrong that it's Burma, or I'm not sure what country, but there's something interesting there about like a country where death is meditated on very frequently, you know, tends to have a higher self-reported rate of happiness. And it's probably more like saying, yeah, the more you remember you die, the more present you're going to be. So,
wow.
Yeah.
I've never heard that. That's heavy, because it's funny how people take that question. I go, can you forget to die? And they don't know if I'm talking literally or metaphorically.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it's however they want to put it in the context.
Mm-hmm.
But these Burma people you're talking about, you're saying they practice a more conscious awareness of dying all the time, so that it makes them more present in the now? Or
That's the theory. Yeah.
Yeah, that's sort of Ram Dass, be here now. Sure been fun spending this nowness with you, Linus. Thank you so much, man.
Yeah, it's been great. I just keep writing down notes on my phone so I don't forget something later. I've got some ideas for my writing now.
Good. And even though I'm going to hit the end broadcast button, I hope this never ends and we schedule part 2, and then it keeps going after that even.
Perfect.
I really learned a lot. Thank you so much, Linus.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.